Joining me now, NBC News Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Dilanian, NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard, and former U.S. Attorney and law professor Barbara McQuade. All right, Ken, walk us through the differences between this indictment and the last one.
So this is obviously a pared down version of the same allegations, Katie. 45 pages down to 36 pages. And it's important to note, it accuses Donald Trump of the same three criminal conspiracies that the original indictment did. That's conspiracy to defraud the United States, to obstruct Congress, and to deprive millions of Americans of their vote. The biggest thing Smith removed from the original, as you mentioned, is the entire section describing how Trump pressured the Justice Department to launch bogus investigations and make false declarations of fraud. And that's no surprise because the Supreme Court actually said in its opinion that communications with the Justice Department were clearly official acts by a president and therefore immune from prosecution. Smith also removed other allegations involving Trump's dealings with advisors in the Oval Office and other federal officials, but he kept in Trump's conversations with state officials, which is most of the original indictment. Smith also removed some Trump tweets because the Supreme Court seemed to say that statements by a president are usually official acts. Now, Smith did not remove allegations that Trump committed crimes by pressuring then Vice President Mike Pence to delay the certification of votes on January 6th. And the theory there seems to be that Pence was acting as president of the Senate and Trump was acting as a candidate, so this was not a president communicating with his vice president. Of course, Trump's lawyers can be expected to challenge that. In fact, they're likely to argue that most of the allegations still standing were, in fact, official acts and should be struck.
Yeah, Barbara, take that a little deeper, and let's focus on the Pence stuff, because Pence is his vice president. How strong is the argument that Jack Smith is making in this indictment to say that they can overcome the presumption of immunity here?
Yeah, this is the one that is probably going to be the trickiest. I imagine Judge Chutkan is going to schedule a hearing and will examine all of these allegations. Most of the conduct relating to Trump as candidate seems fair game for prosecution. But this one has an overlap. As Ken said, it frames this allegation in terms of Mike Pence as president of the Senate. But what the court said in its opinion is that they would protect anything that might intrude upon the president's constitutional duties as the executive. And so to the extent that Mike Pence also served as vice president in the executive branch, there is some risk of that intrusion. So I imagine this will be heavily litigated. But I can see why Jack Smith wants this in. This really is the heart of the whole case, getting Mike Pence to block the certification. It's a very important part of the narrative, I think. And so they'll litigate it and they'll figure out whether this is in or out.
But Chief Justice, in the majority opinion on this case, wrote that whenever the president and the vice president discuss their official responsibilities, they engage in official conduct. It seems like it's going to be a high burden to meet to overcome that presumption of immunity. If they're not able to, does Jack Smith have a case without the conversations with Vice President Mike Pence?
I think so, and you're right. I think this is going to be litigated. We're going to see a decision on this probably ultimately by the Supreme Court. Even without the Mike Pence evidence, however, I think the narrative is a little less complete, but there is still evidence of Donald Trump, allegations of Donald Trump pressuring state officials to change their slate of electors, organizing fake slates of electors, and exploiting the chaos at the Capitol even after the attack took place. And so that still puts together, I think, a fairly compelling case. It's just, one arm tied behind their back as they proceed.
Ken, what about the timing? Why file this today or yesterday?
Well, the two sides have until Friday to submit proposals for how to move forward in this case. And what comes next are likely a series of hearings, as Barbara said, hashing out disputes over what parts of this case can survive. And ultimately, Judge Chutkan will rule on all of that. But it's important to note, either side can appeal that ruling all the way up to the Supreme Court before the trial. So that means that even if Trump loses, this trial will be a long way off. We're talking months, maybe even more than a year. Katie.
All right, we're going to have to wait for an election before then. So how is Donald Trump responding to the superseding indictment, the recasting of this indictment, these charges against him?
Overnight, he called it election interference. He called it a direct attack on democracy. But I think more importantly for our conversation, Katie, just in the last 2 hours, he has posted a flurry of vengeful memes on his Truth Social account. Memes that I think we have a couple of them that we can pull up here, I think that are very quite explicit. You have one, AI images of his perceived enemies. You see Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, Kamala Harris, Nancy Pelosi, Hillary Clinton, Fauci, Bill Gates in orange jumpsuits with the text, how to actually fix the system. You have another one where you see Jack Smith. You see, I think actually, I'm going to call up the one that we are looking at right now. You see the words indict, sedition, and lock them up from the January 6th Select Committee. And then you've got another one. You see there Jack Smith with the text, quote, he should be prosecuted for election interference and prosecutorial misconduct. A fourth one that I want people to see. You have President Obama with the text that calls for, quote, public military tribunals of Obama and others. There's a flurry of others. There's others that are QAnon themed. This is Donald Trump just in the last 2 hours.
And we'd have to do digging. It doesn't seem like these are posted by real people. Just the handles with the emojis on them and the quality of these AI images. You wonder if it's an individual somewhere that's actually posting this and creating this stuff all on their own, or if it's done by a bot or some other agency that wants to influence things. But put that aside.
Right.
This is the former president reposting images of his opponents, political opponents in prison, and not just political opponents, big business leaders like Bill Gates.
And Donald Trump says a lot. He posts a lot on this Truth Social account. Last month, he called for public military tribunals of Liz Cheney here. So on one hand, this isn't new, but we're 2 months out from an election. And this, if for anybody to suggest that retribution is not on Donald Trump's mind, go to his social media account, because this is where he has direct control over what he can post and repost. And when I talk about 2 months out, Donald Trump is laying the groundwork, Katie, claiming election interference, saying that Google is already having election interference. The superseding indictment yesterday from Jack Smith is election interference. The gag order in the upcoming sentencing in Lower Manhattan here from Judge Merchan is election interference. He's calling the fake AI images that he claimed Kamala Harris posted of her crowds, which of course were not fake. He said that those were election interference and that she should be disqualified. Donald Trump is laying the foundation for claiming that the 2024 election was stolen. And while the focus could very well be on the indictment that Jack Smith has brought before him for election interference of the last case, Donald Trump clearly is looking towards the future.
It's not just those around him that are saying that his opponent should be prosecuted. It's not just Steve Bannon coming out and ranting about it on a podcast. This is Donald Trump reposting things. It's him saying it with his own words, flirting with the possibility. I keep thinking back to something that David Frum wrote months ago before there was any debate scheduled between anybody, before the Biden and Trump debate, the idea that there would be two candidates on stage and they would be treated as both legitimate and both equal. They'd be talking about economics and food prices. Well, one of those candidates tried to overturn an election, denied that there was a free and fair election, and still continues to do so. The root level discomfort with equating that or making it on the same level as talking about, policy agendas for the next White House, things as mundane but as important as the economy, likening that or making it on equal footing with a guy that tried to stay in office when the voters kicked him out. Vaughn Hilliard, Ken Delaney, and Barbara McQuaid. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you guys very much.